So there's a lot of fanboys that get their ruffles up in a bunch over what they feel very strongly about. I saw it with Harry Potter back in the day with J.K. Rowling, which I also didn't like, and even with Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power that have come out recently, and the Lord of the Rings movies when they came out. I watched the first one and I refused to watch the other two until the hype went down years later after it was done, and then so I could actually watch it without all the hype. And this is what happens when like a series comes out like this, where all the hype is there and all the fanboys come out and nobody thinks rationally. They just like to claim things, make broad strokes. If the dragons of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon are meant to represent nuclear bombs, then Martin has failed because nuclear power should never be used. So the discussion should be how the dragons should never be used in the war, but they've already been used in the war uh, in the show, and we already know what it's going to lead to. So he has failed in that discussion. And your analogy, if that's the analogy you want to make, fails. Martin does do a good job of showing consequences of the dirty, everyday political scheming and the power grabbing that has occurred. Sure, but he tempers it with no alternative. It's simply a vicious cycle of decay with no redemption. This is where the modern literature that has arisen since Harry Potter in the fantasy world, and Game of Thrones is probably the most egregious because it is the most popular, fails. The fantasy world is not all about just the decay of humanity, the political scheming, and the power grab. Anybody can do a novel about that. It's meant to bring in other elements, and it's meant to juxtapose the decay, the vicious cycle of decay, with the alternative of the ability for redemption. If you don't provide that, which is why originally I got excited to watch Game of Thrones and was severely let down, because I thought, okay, this is going to lead to a huge battle where there's something more bigger than our petty human battles with each other, our petty human affairs that we need to put aside to come together to overcome something bigger. And this is going to make that happen. And the dragons were kind of like that spiritual redeeming quality, perhaps a representation of godliness itself that arrives as a tool to help us overcome that evil. But that's not what happened. All you got was the vicious cycle of decay, the vicious cycle of cruelty, with nothing else to juxtapose it to. I don't hate House of the Dragon. Some people think that because I'm criticizing, I hate it. I don't. I'm watching it. I'm watching the show, and I'm enjoying what I'm watching, even though I would have never watched it if it wasn't for my partner wanting me to watch it and discuss it together. It's simply a waste of my time. There's a reason why a show like Sopranos, to get completely away from fantasy, why The Sopranos on HBO was a great show. There's another show on HBO that was great. Because if you take out the trappings of the mafia nonsense and the fact that it was making fun of that, you really get an in-depth psychological analysis of the American experience as we experience it in the different roles that we have, whether that's mother, father, son, daughter, brother, sister, cousin, and how what is sold to us as an American dream is very different from what we experience, and how it really forces us to be petty and awful to each other. But it does so in a way that it's actually it's actually commenting on it rather than just saying this is the American dream and this is a show about mafia and people killing each other. It's actually going into depth into trying to give an analysis of what we are struggling with, what the current American experience is struggling with. And it's not fantasy, so it's not trying to juxtapose it to any kind of redeeming quality. It's more of a an actual novel. That's a different thing. But because it does that, it's amazing. Some people say that George loves Tolkien's work, but he's doing his own thing, right? He's not trying to mimic Tolkien's. This isn't, I wasn't talking about style. I was talking about the actual depiction and symbolism of dragons in the fantasy world throughout the entire history from ancient mythology up to Tolkien, not about a style. My problem is not with his style, actually. I like George Martin's style. I think he's a good writer in terms of understanding the elements, but that's it. He has no higher purpose outside of sensationalism. But my look into what the book covers and how it's depicted on HBO show me a completely different picture from what people that love it are saying. It's just not believable that dragons would ever allow humans to ride them. Period. It's demeaning for a creature of that size, of that magnificence, to ever allow that to happen. It would never happen. It's a child's fantasy. It's what you as a child would love. Oh, there's a beautiful dragon. I want to ride. I want to ride it. I want to feel powerful and soar into the air. A dragon would never listen to you. If you understood what the dragon symbolism was, the sheer ferocity of it, there's no reason for it to listen to you.
But wishes, of course, are for children.
And the blood symbiosis that George Martin wants you to believe in is, again, what you want to believe in. But there's actually, fantasy worlds have rules that they have to obey. And these rules are moral. And they're also, in my opinion, common sense. But I don't know. There's a lot of people that don't have common sense. I use the Bible. Some people think I'm Bible thumping by mentioning the very famous thing about the word of God. The word is God and God is the word. It's just used to illustrate the higher concept that your voice comes from your ability to reason and not just utter words that you were taught. The elves in Tolkien taught men to speak, and they in turn learned it from the Valar, right? The idea is that speech comes from the higher sphere down to us, not from our balls up. I just know it when I'm dealing with garbage. I don't know the age groups here. I don't know where you're at in your life experience. I now look for specific things in what I read because time is priceless. If you see something that feeds your soul in it, then by all means carry on reading it. I see only the negative without the balance ever of the positive in George Martin's, at least the HBO depiction. And that's the folly for Western culture since the new millennium. We want depravity and sensationalism without the balance of the uplifting and the fresh air that it brings to the soul. These things are being staunchly deprecated in everything that we consume. And I'm not about that. My problem with Martin's Dragons is that he's borrowing from the lexicon without adding anything to it. I was excited in Game of Thrones when I saw the premise, like I already said, was the Nightwalkers versus the dragons, but it was clear that this was never the intention and it lost all appeal to me. This is ever present in the sagas of Middle-earth on every level and in every subplot. The constant battle between the decay of human existence, the depravity of evil, and the higher sphere of redemption, the ability to be redeemed from your mistakes, from your errors, from your evil ways. You cannot remove that and have a fantasy world anymore. I don't know your experiences, but mine have had their challenges, and cruelty is something I'm very familiar with. And I read books to lift my spirit from the mundane, not to re-experience it in ways that bring no liberation. People talk about, again, how he shows the everyday political scheming and power. We are living through that in our everyday lives with what is going on politically in our world. And with the people we deal with at work, whatever our jobs may be, why in the world would I want to experience that in my writing, especially fantasy? It can be there as an element. It can play its part. But when that's all you have, I don't want to experience it. I can do so many other things with my time, and that's why I don't read the books. It's not because I feel that they're not to depreciate them, but because they don't have what I'm looking for in them. The Targaryens are toxic. The story should be how the Westerosi get rid of them, or how they unite against a bigger evil. But the bigger evil is a joke in our modern world, because we know we are the evil ones and need to expunge it from ourselves. Animals do not have this problem. Aegon would be fascinating if he used his suffering after the Sunfire event, after the death of Sunfire and how he got burnt nearly to a crisp, to turn against the Greens, his own side, and understand the significance of his role as a king. That would be something I could get behind. That would be something that would be uplifting. Then I would champion him over even Rhaenyra. But you look at the timeline of Game of Thrones, and it's just shit after shit after shit. The nepotism and the narcissism of humanity is in full effect, unchecked. I already see that every day. Thank you very much. I don't need it in my art, unless again it's something like Sopranos, which isn't fantasy. When I go to fantasy, I go for something that juxtaposes that with the capacity for redemption and for the appeal to a higher sphere of being, which is what we get with the Valar. We don't get that with Martin. And if it's there, please show it to me. Otherwise, a lot of this is just fanboying.